So welcome everyone to today's event exploring the photographic series Gingers by Kieran Dodds and its connection to the science of genetics. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all the gingers in the audience and to everyone joining us online. I'm Louise Pearson, a curator of photography, and I'll be chairing the event today. So 3 of Kieran's portraits from the series Gingers are currently on display in the exhibition Counted, Scotland Census 2022 at the Portrait Gallery. The exhibition was inspired by the questions asked in the census and explores the complex notion of identity. It's been an opportunity to celebrate who we are, what we have in common, and what makes us unique. So Gingers focuses on a physical trait, but it explores ideas around individual and national identity and the connection Scotland has with the rest of the world. So to introduce our speakers, so we've got Kieran Dodds, who is a non-fiction photographer known for his research-driven photo stories and portraiture. His personal work considers the interplay of environment and culture, tracing global events through daily lives. Recent projects have included the series Gingers, exploring the visual cliché of Scottish national identity, and Heritopia, considering deforestation in Ethiopia and the small forests surrounding churches that remain. His work has been shown at the Scottish Parliament, Inverness Museum and Art Gallery, and the State Hermitage Museum, St Petersburg, and now at the Portrait Gallery, Edinburgh. Albert Tenessa studied agricultural engineering at the Polytechnic University of Valencia before coming to Edinburgh to study a master's in quantitative genetics and genome analysis. I'm not a scientist. He then carried out his PhD in quantitative genetics at the Institute of Evolutionary Biology at the University of Edinburgh. After a postdoc to understand the genetics of bowel cancer, he became a group leader at the Roslin Institute and Institute of Genetics and Cancer. Albert's research aims to understand how genetic variation contributes to phenotypic variations to complex traits in humans. Albert says these are fancy words to say that he's interested in understanding why we are all different and at the same time very similar. Among the traits that Albert studies is hair colour. So Kieran and Albert are each going to briefly introduce their work, then we're going to have a panel discussion followed by audience questions. So Kieran.
Great. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It would be sad without you. But also to National Galleries for putting on this event at the end of the show. It's such an honour, one of the greatest honours of my career and life, to be in the collection, to be acquired by the National Galleries. So I'm going to start off, where you should with Ginger here, with a map of fruit bat distribution in Africa, as you should, because I want to give a sense of my process as an artist, as a photographer, and my background actually is in zoology. I studied that at university, and I studied, in particular, ecology. And ecology is showing and trying to understand why animals or organisms distribute in the landscape. And so for me, most stories that I start, most projects, begin with a map or are strengthened by a map. So I've got 3 quick maps to show you, and some pictures as well, because we like pictures. But it's just to make the point that actually I'm an environmental photographer primarily, and my ecological roots are still strong. But it's not just nature in a romantic sublime, it's also humanity as part of that system. And so here we were tracking these bats. 8 million bats appeared every October from nowhere and then disappeared to nowhere 2 months later. And so actually the scientists were tracking them to try and work out where they went, basically. So then they made a map as they went into the Congo. 2,000 kilometers in 3 months, these bats. And then an eagle ate them or something. Sad story. So then here we are in the highlands, Tibetan highlands, in the center of China. And you've got the 3 rivers headwaters, the Yellow, Yangtze, Mekong rivers. And I was there to show how Tibetan lives were being cleared off the land into these settlements. I call it China's highland clearances. And you start to understand why this is happening when you look at the map and the geopolitical importance of this third pole, the ice and the rivers there. It doesn't justify it necessarily, but at least it sets it in context why these highlands are incredibly important and fought over. But again, I'm not just doing the landscape, I'm showing the people within that. And then you mentioned as well the Church Forests of Ethiopia, that was a book I brought out just before Christmas. and again, looking at the Industrial Revolution in Ethiopia in the last decade and how the environment was bearing the cost. But it was actually quite refreshing because usually environmental stories are quite depressing, aren't they? But for a change, I found a story of hope where all these little dots, there's about 12,000 dots, and each is a little jewel of a forest around a church building. And so you've got this whole network across Amhara province, which is about the size of England and Wales. So again, it's an environmental story photographing forests. I was in Nature. That's just to get your respect there, Albert. In the news section.
Doing better than me.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's all. That's all. I'll just give a brief bit about the gingers. There's a few threads coming together, and two little gingers in this picture at the back of the room. So that's nice to see them. Their first lecture. So please, shh. They've been very good. They've been very good. But it's such an honour to share this here because actually the genesis of the project, well, it started when I was born because I was ginger, but the genesis in terms of why I did it, when I did it, was because of this building just upstairs. So here's three pictures. The Loch Ness Monster was part of a story I did just the year before the Scottish independence referendum. I started doing different stories, and one was about land and mythology. I did one actually interviewing people called William Wallace, called What Would William Wallace Do? And I did other ones as well, but the gingers was just for me a singular idea. I'm a cliche of national identity, and yet even in Scotland, it's a tiny percentage, less than 13%, maybe fewer. And it's so small, and yet everyone thinks in the world we're pale and ginger. So I thought that was quite fun. And then I came for a private tour with someone who's getting shown around. I tagged along, and we went upstairs into the early Renaissance room. It's now sealed off. It's coming back. I always wonder what if they're like doing autopsies of aliens or something. But it's sealed off. It's the Botticelli pictures printed on it, and you could go through that door up into the early Renaissance room. And someone had told me, look at the depictions of Jesus early on. They're all ginger. And I was like, come on. So I went upstairs and I looked around, and sure enough, every single painting, there was a ginger person in it. Usually the person right at the centre, Jesus or Mary. And I thought, there's something going on here. And so I looked into it, and I thought that was the kind of genesis. It's the Scottish sort of identity cliche. It's this place in art history where you've got Middle Eastern characters depicted by Southern European artists, and yet they're all ginge for some reason. But the thing that sealed it and made me do it, which is why I laboriously showed you maps, was this dubious map from the internet, which has no references and seems like it seems right. It's got the Celtic fringe of Scotland and Ireland and Wales. And I showed it just before you all came in, and he was like, this is good. And I'll get the scientific explanation in a second. But in 2013, I saw this map, and I thought, I need to do Scotland. But you'll notice that hotspot in the east in Russia. And so that, from 2013, I had these ideas, and then that's how the gingers began. So I'll say that, and then I'll hand over to Albert to give us some scientific foundations.
All right. So as you can see, I'm not originally from Scotland, despite my strong accent. But I am interested in understanding why there is so much variation in humans. We share 99% of the DNA. Still, we are very different in hair color, eye color, disease risk, height, and many other aspects of how we look and how we age. And we started working on the genetics of hair color because a colleague of mine that was interested in hair color asked me for help with the analysis of the data. Maybe you haven't heard before, but in 2006 or so, there was started a big study called UK Biobank, where they recruited 500,000 people from the UK, and all of these people reported some traits like hair color, and their genome has been assayed, and that provided the background to do the largest study on hair color that had been ever performed. So in the UK Biobank, to give you an idea, there are about 16,000 gingers. or that they believe they are gingers. We need to trust them because that's self-reported. But what we basically did was comparing the genomes of the gingers to people with black hair. And then we identified new genes that determine whether people will have red hair or not. One of them we already knew from the biology, that is called MC1R, and that's the gene that has the largest effect, and that probably explains that picture in the middle. That genetic variant is a lot more prevalent in Scotland and in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And actually, if that map is quite interesting because in the northern of Spain is where we have more gingers, and that's because we were invaded by the British many years back. But there are 3 main points where we have lots of ginger in the brown part of the map. Mm. One is the mines of Rio Tinto in Huelva, and that's because they were run by British. The other one is in Murcia, which is just south of Alicante. And again, there's a mine-rich region that was run by British. And the third one is Menorca. And Menorca was under British control for over a century. Well, for about a century, for the most of the 18th century. So that shows that some of the genes brought by the British remained in Spain. How? I'm running out of time? Yeah. All right, okay. So how the hair color is basically determined by 2 pigments that we produce. One is a black pigment that is called eumelanin, and another pigment is called pheomelanin, and that's red. And the different proportion of the 2 pigments that we produce is what determines our hair color. So black hair people produce don't produce much of the red pigment, and vice versa, red hair people produce a lot more of the red hair color. And blondes, and they are halfway in the middle. There's also that also changes sometimes. So you will have seen animals that have the hair is of different colors. So it might change as the hair grows. The distribution of production of one of the pigments or the other changes, and that's what gives this kind of brownish color that some animals in the wild have that make them being able to camouflage from predators. The other thing that is important, so that there is all of these 2 melanin pigments that I was telling, the red and the black, to be produced, they need another hormone which is called tyrosinase. And people that lack tyrosinase for whatever reason, those are those that are albinos. They cannot produce none of the pigments, and that's why they have white hair. Also, another important thing is that I think gingers have much lighter skin. That's probably an evolutionary response. As you go north, there's less sun, and when there is less sun, you produce less vitamin D. So lighter skin makes you compensate for that. That's why, for instance, children of dark hair color people in the UK, sometimes they are offered vitamin D supplements because they cannot produce as much vitamin D because the dark skin color prevents that from happening. And finally, obviously, white fair people have a lot more risk of developing a cancer called melanoma, which is a cancer of the skin. And that's again because the black pigments in the skin, those kind of are protective of UV radiation, and people with fair skin color don't produce as much. So that's me, I guess.
That's really interesting.
Sorry, sorry if I don't. Yeah.
I think we all needed a bit of a reminder of kind of the genetics behind the red hair gene. So I think a kind of a good thing to start with was to ask Kieran how much you knew about the kind of genetics and how much that's influenced the series as you've developed it.
Whoa.
It's quite a big question.
How much genetic? Yeah, I think, so there has been, I'll put some ginger people up.
Oh, yeah.
That's the background. There's a setup. I used that I just borrowed halls off people. It's one light, one background, and a lot of people. So I'll put the Mackays up. What's the question?
How much you were thinking
How
about
much I was
genetics
thinking
when we
about
were doing the
genetics.
project?
Yeah. So I think obviously the first thought was I'm ginger, and so genetics was a big part of that. But then I quickly went on. So it's foundational, basically, to that, obviously. But there's also, I mean, other people have done portraits of ginger people before, but they tend to get people like just naked, head and shoulders, and it's very medically shot. So it's just like white background, and they just talk about the genetics. Whereas actually, I want to do something different. So I took the genetics as foundational, and actually sort of thought about the cultural aspects. So how it appears in art history, and then every person I spoke to, I'd interview them and ask them, their experiences of it. Which became like a ginger support group. You're sitting there and you're like, oh, how are you feeling about it all? But it was good. It was good for all of us, actually. But then the genetic part, as the story grew, so I started in Scotland for the independence referendum, but as I went to other places, and these are all, I went to Dundee, all the way to Dundee, and then obviously the Russian part, and even London, actually. It was in London I met people from all over the world. Gilad Belkin, who has also been acquired by the gallery. He's hiding away, waiting for his moment. He's coming. That's a lovely portrait. He's the one who looks a bit like depictions of Jesus, but he's from Israel. So I met him in London and some other people, and that made me think, actually, what is the flow of genes? We're a migrating species, and it's this ebb and flow of humanity through the earth. Is it because of trade? Is it because of war? Or just necessity and curiosity we move around? So so the genes it was there throughout. It runs through it like our genes.
And I think, obviously you've talked in the project that, you're ginger, that your daughters are ginger, and it feels like quite a personal project. So I wondered if there was kind of aspects of that you wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Well, my parents are fruit bats. So, obviously the ginger aspect, it's funny. I think nowadays it's good to have, you can tell the story. I think there's this thing with ginger as well. You can't even use that word because it's.
Ask you about that later.
Yeah, I'll wait.
Whenever you want.
Right, but it's. I feel like I could use that word because it is for its descriptive power. Because red is like a letterbox or like a fire engine, whereas ginger has this kind of richness, this spectrum, this kind of range. And it's interesting you're saying about self-reporting. Like, actually, how do you know if someone is ginger? Because someone will come for a portrait, and I'm like, are you sure? And then they change the light, and you're like, oh yeah, fair enough. But you've got to. It's like the genetics plus environment plus age. I mean, I'm changing my colour, not chemically, but it just fades with age. So I think that's.
I think something that we were talking about just before we started, and I was saying that my mum had red hair and was very disappointed that I didn't. So I wanted to ask Albert about how it skips generations, and I think we kind of talked a little bit about that with the genetics, but could you kind of tell us how it kind of comes through generations when people don't always expect it to pop up again?
Yeah, so there is one gene that has a much bigger effect on our hair color. That's this MC1R, and that gene. Everybody has two copies of the same gene. They are like two versions. I always explain as two versions of the same song. So one version could be sung by Dolly Parton and the other by whoever. Okay, so we have two versions. We get one from that, one from mom. There is one version that produces red hair color, but you need the two versions of the red hair color to have red. So if your two parents have the two copies, so the two versions of the red hair color, the children most likely than not they will have red hair. If one has red hair color and the other one has brown hair color and has one copy, then 50% of the children will have red hair color. but they might have brown hair color and have no copy. So then the children all will have one copy, and when they have children because they married with someone that also has one copy, 1/4 of their children will have hair color. Obviously, we don't have many children, so there is a chance that if you only have one children, well, you're unlucky. You don't have,
That's all right.
so that's how
So it's
usually
my dad's
happens.
fault.
Probably yes.
Find it out, yeah.
I wondered if we could show Jack again.
Jack, yeah.
Yeah, so Jack,
Jack Manon.
when the recording of the interview that you did with him, he really talked about how he felt connected to his granddad because of this kind of ginger hair. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the portrait that you made with him.
Yeah, Jack was he's in a wheelchair there. He's got cerebral palsy, and he's just the sweetest lad and the strongest lad. The look in his face there. So I met him in Dundee, and his mum was there, and it was, I'm a Scotsman, so I don't get emotional that much. But with Jack and his mum, just the beauty of the bond between them, as he's explaining all the operations he'd been through and things, and then the family connection, that real strength with his granddad. He's just a great lad. I'm so pleased I met him actually, and he was part of a show which was put in the hoardings in Mary Slessor Square in Dundee. But he always stood out, not just the intensity of his gaze, but also just that fierce bond between his mother and him. And I got quite emotional. I actually cut the interview short because I was welling up. I was just like, okay, let's take a picture, which maybe isn't what I should have done, but it was choking up. So.
And I think we're to come back to the Ginger's name. Obviously, that's the name of the series. And I think that looking through the portraits, most of the sitters talk about a kind of pride in being ginger, and they voluntarily came forward to have their portrait made. So I wondered if we could talk a little bit about why you decided to use that word, because obviously sometimes it is used as a derogatory term. So I kind of felt a bit like it might be reclaiming the word, and I don't know if that's how you felt about it.
Yeah, it is. It's reclaiming it a bit. Also, art's meant to be a bit controversial. You meant to rile people up slightly, but I just thought partly it was. That wasn't my motivation. My motivation was I just thought red is frustrated me over the years when people say red, because I just think of like scarlet red, blood red, whereas I just felt like this, especially seeing the paintings. I think that was it. It's golden. It's like a hairy halo almost. It's this amazing golden thing. So I thought I'll try and reframe gingers to be something of that beauty and the depth and the sort of spectrum of colours, rather than just saying red. But it's funny because it's been published various places, and the headline writers always change it to red hair, or like I'm just like, use this phrase, But I think people probably in here, you feel a bit like, can I say that? Yes, I give you permission. But for some people, it has been, and they found it. Not many have written to me and said they find it an offensive term, but people have come to me saying usually they would see it as that, but they start to embrace it as a good descriptor.
Yeah, and
rather because people have called me ginger, whatever over the years. It's been thrown at me, so I thought I probably shouldn't say in front of kids, but yeah, it's trying to reclaim that a bit.
That makes sense. And I think one of the things that's really obvious when you look through the whole series, I don't know if you want to show a few more of the portraits, that there is a real spectrum of kind of red from, really, really vivid to kind of much more subtle. So I wondered maybe first if, Albert, you could tell us a little bit about what causes that. It doesn't seem to be just kind of red or not red. Is that genetic, or is that like lifestyle or other factors?
No, probably some of it is genetics, is that different proportions of the black and red pigments. So when there are different variations of those genes, so some reduce the function of there are proteins on the cells that are almost the gatekeepers of what the cells need to do. So depending on the mutation on those genes, the efficacy of that gate may change, and that is what may determine different spectrums of the hair color.
But that wouldn't change over your lifetime, would it? Because the hair color changes, but there wouldn't be anything, or would there?
No, you would be ginger, well, not in the end.
Yes.
But
genetically, you're genetic to the core. You're ginger to the core, but your hair color might change, but it's
Yeah, well, maybe
so to speak.
in adulthood it doesn't change. But during early years, the hair color changes.
Yeah, it does.
My son was not ginger, he was blonde when he was born, and my wife was so upset. And I was also blonde when I was born, and now look. So it changes. On the first years, it changes, and we really not understand why.
Mm-hmm.
So more
why that
research,
has come
maybe.
about.
Some genes turn on and off.
Yeah,
Interesting.
maybe some kind of evolutionary advantage as well.
Yeah.
Because I think, I think what makes the series so beautiful in many ways is that this dark background and this very, dramatic kind of the ginger hair, I can't say red, ginger hair on the on the background. So I don't know, Kieran, do you want to tell us a little bit more about why you decided to photograph in that way and frame the portraits in that way? Because I think if you haven't been to see the exhibition yet, they really, when they first arrived, we were like, wow, the kind of impact that they have on the wall is really something.
Yeah.
So
And
the scale of it as well.
Yeah, I made them big for that reason. But they painted the wall bright. Ginger logs.
Yes.
Is that the name of the paint?
I went down a kind of route with the...
I didn't know that till I got there, and I was like, wow. That's amazing. We're just painting our house just now. I wouldn't do it in my bedroom, but it was good. It's good on the gallery walls. But the dark background, it was partly informed, again, the portrait gallery, I'm not just saying this, was my favourite place to go growing up. We'd go on a Sunday, my dad would take me there, my mum, and we'd go and look around. And on the top floor, the sort of Enlightenment era painters like Rayburn and David Martin, they've just got that dark background, often blue. And I got a ginger pal in Glasgow, and we tried sort of a grey or dark grey and that. But I just think the warmth and Rembrandty as well. It's just that kind of dark brown. Often that would be the oil and soot and things, but it worked better. And I just wanted to isolate them from that. And it meant that having that one roll of peat brown that cost 40 quid in 2013, I've carried it around the world, as a Scotsman, that is good value. So they still sell it, actually. I could get a new roll, but I'm not. But I took that around the world, and I hope to do more, actually, whenever time and resources allow. I've got a visa to go somewhere. So it's just using that setup, keep it simple, and use that dark background.
I think there's something about the consistency of, all the different places you've been, and there's this very consistent way of taking the photograph.
I mean, it was a nightmare to get through. Like, get to Jamaica, it's like one of these huge big boxes for skis, and you've got all the stands, and you set it up in some beach villa, which was good. But yeah, it means it's worth it for that effort.
Yeah, definitely.
But trying to get it to arrive in the middle of Russia was quite an effort.
I think kind of following on from that, we haven't talked much yet about how you kind of took it from Scotland to the rest of the world. So if you want to kind of tell us a little bit about some of those travels.
Do you want a map?
Yeah, go back to the map.
So Inverness, there's the Flow Photo Festival up there, and so they gave me the excuse. They said you can have some walls in the Inverness Museum, and so I used that as an excuse just to do some portraits in Inverness. And because I desperately wanted to go to Russia to do that, find that hot spot, it was actually the Udmurt Republic in the Upper Volga, but the nearest big city that I could get to was Perm, which was perfect for a story on hair, if you think about it. It's totally lost to the Russians because they call it a chemical. So I was laughing away, and the local guy didn't like that. But it's almost the exact same distance north. It's latitude, isn't it? And it was just... So I photographed them in Russia and in Scotland and then put them side by side. And even then, I thought of Russia as the bad guy. Like, growing up, when I first went there, you're always thinking everyone's a spy. There was this kind of natural and acceptable prejudice against Russia, and I wanted to look at that. And so I exhibited Russians and Scots side by side to sort of challenge that. And even today, saying that feels more difficult, actually. But I wanted to put a face to the millions of normal Russians who are beyond their political leaders. So that's how the Inverness and Russia parts. And then it was actually another builder, had just come back from holiday in Jamaica. And he said, "Oh, there's ginger people in Jamaica, And I thought, one, I'm in the wrong job. That I'm going off to like Mull, and he's going off to Jamaica. But I thought, right, I need to get there, and it took a while. And it was actually showing to your colleague and just saying what I was going to do next. And that was 2019. I went there and did the Jamaican portraits. But and it was again the great people. just looking at the context and why this was, it just really opened my eyes actually to world migration and over history, how things change in colonialisation and failed empires from Scotland and things like that. So
I think there's like so many different connections. It kind of centres Scotland in this kind of world, trade and industry. So I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit perhaps about why Jamaica? I think that's such an interesting part of the project and how this gene is present in Jamaica.
Well, so I mean, there's Jamaica there on the map. If you don't know, I'd never been there, but obviously knew it was sort of owned by the Brits. Colonised, but it's also colonised by many powers. So, like the Spanish conquistadors first, and then French owned, and then England, and then the UK. And it's just these successive waves of people, and then African slaves coming in, obviously, and indentured labourers from Scotland, Jacobite soldiers and Covenanters who were sent there as prisoners. And it's just such an incredibly complex history as well, that it's hard to pinpoint exactly why, and I'm not entirely sure why, but it's the motto of the country is out of many, one nation. And it's that kind of amazing mixing of genes through the dark history, but also there's the sort of people falling in love and getting married, and it's not just a dark legacy, it's just, I think it reveals the incredible complexity of human beings, but also how we are interlinked and how there is this deep beauty that can come to the surface as well. In that, so I love the portraits of, and I just love being there. Go to Treasure Beach, everybody. It's just stunning. And I think he's in a small print of him is in the collection as well now. And his name is Randy Wong. And again, with him, his second name Wong. I mean, that's straight out of Asia, isn't it? So in Russia, just skip through, you got Sveta Ni, N-I, and she was saying her dad's side was from China. Back generations, and when you look at Perm on the map, it's near Central Asia, and in Western China, I suppose there's a lot of gingers, though you can't go there now, and so you even think that maybe it's where the gene arose in Central Asia, and you've got the sense of the ebb and flow of peoples and groups. But you've got in Russia, I've got a Ni, and then in Jamaica, I've got a Wong. So I feel like it's like the whole world, even though it's just 11 time zones I've done. It sort of encapsulates that.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of emails over the course of the exhibition for people suggesting where Kieran should go next.
Oh, really?
So absolutely. So I don't think that you're quite done yet.
Okay.
And I think like in the context of the portrait gallery as well, portraits of kind of slave owners and industrialists. So kind of having these portraits is an interesting way of kind of looking at the kind of wider context of it. I wonder if could we go back to Alexander? We've got him there. Yeah.
Yeah, on my maps. Oops.
I think what I really loved about this portrait is that actually you kind of, you look at him and you think, oh, he's a wee Scottish laddie, but actually do you want to talk a little bit about his heritage? Because I think that was, it makes people think, actually it's not quite as straightforward as you think.
And I was surprised, because again, I never know who's going to turn up. I do arrange the portraits, but this day, obviously, arranged for Alex and his mum to come in Inverness. This is part of the sort of Russia Inverness shoots, and just speaking to his mum about story, and she was from Eastern Europe, and she's saying his dad is from the Middle East, and they'd moved to Scotland to Inverness to settle, and then he's growing up there, so he's a Scottish lad. But it's that beautiful picture, isn't it, of like, where are we from? What is our background? What is our deeper story? And I feel like there's this, you can ask these questions and look into it, because it invites that. Almost, I think here people think of it as superficial and a bit flippant, like silly. It's like you go get your hair done, but it's in our genes. It's written into the core of our being in every cell, and it shows our history as human beings. And I just loved him because one, he looks awesome, and he had that lovely expression which people do seem to enjoy, and his little jacket buttoning up. But also his life story is just really fascinating.
And he's been very popular, I think. Yeah, very popular indeed.
He's the cover of the Little Book of Gingers, which I brought out, because he's just so cool.
Okay, so I've got one final question before we go to the audience. So you've mainly photographed ordinary people who came forward as part of this kind of project.
Yes.
And I wondered if you had your eye on any high-profile gingers that you would really like to photograph as part of this project, or just kind of on the side?
It was a very conscious effort to just have ordinary people.
Yeah.
Partly because I don't know many famous people, and that would limit it. But even then, over the time, I thought actually the point of it is to show that we're all made of the same stuff. And using this gene, this visible trait, you can show that we're made of the same stuff across the world. And I feel like a famous person would be distracting, a celebrity in the context. If you've got Ed Sheeran outside, I'm happy. I'm happy, Ed. I'll do your picture. But I feel like that was part of the thing. It's almost like the pictures upstairs. There was this carpenter from the Middle East and his teenage mum, and it's like they were. I mean, obviously they became more famous, but it's just like normal people have this kind of touch, almost a kiss of divinity, and like the golden hair reveals that in human beings, a spark of something divine. And so I wanted to reveal that in normal people. We're not models. We're not famous for anything, but. And sometimes someone comes in the room, to be honest, and you think, "Ooh, what are we going to do here?" You know, because because I'm judgmental and prejudiced. But actually, that's the whole practice. That's why I like the setup. And I'm being honest here. It's like it doesn't take long before you see the beauty, actually, in people, and it just takes that effort and actually looking. But I think if you're ginger, it's easier to see.
Yeah, yeah. On that note, I think we're going to open up to questions now. So I think we've got a few mics. If anyone's got a question, if you just put your hand up, that'd be great. For Kieran or for Albert.
Oh. Crash system, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
It's superimposed. Yeah.
Would you mind saying to Ross that the mics aren't working? Louise.
Oh, Ross, could you just have a look at the microphones, please? I forgot I had the power of amplified voice.
Come and use this one if you want.
While you're waiting, could I ask a wee question?
Go for it.
I'll do it loudly. I personally didn't like the term ginger. You can't tell from this, but I had red hair. And I always called red hair as a mark of being different. You're reclaiming ginger, and I'm growing towards it. But it is quite insulting, you know. People use that as an insult.
Yeah.
And you've experienced it, and other people have done that as well. Do you think that a project like this will make it softer, make it easier for people?
That's a good question. So the question was, for the recording, using the word ginger, is that made it more acceptable for people in the project? I know what you mean. I think from what I've heard from people getting in touch, I think the fact that I've put it in the context of this, it's a global story. So, for example, the people who really struggle with it are teenagers, people coming of age, because it's the thing that makes you stand out. And so it's like the target for bullies. And so sometimes on the shoots, you'd have people who are going through that, and they might not say it, but their mum will. And so often after, I remember one lad, the mum emailed after just saying, you know, thank you for that. He's walking taller at school now. And you get that quite a lot, actually. And it's just that feeling of you're showing people they're part of a bigger story and a global story, and they're amazing. Because if you're on your own with it, it seems a bit mad. And really, if ginger is the best insult someone can come up with, you think, come on, try, you know, ginger, whatever. But you just think, well, yeah, it is. It's a different colour. So that's partly why it is, and it's partly just the Scottish nature. I'm just like, come on then, come up with a better insult. But I do understand some people do find it quite upsetting. But that's why, hopefully, the project itself, the way it's captured and the way I've gathered it together is sort of redemptive in some way.
Yes, we've noticed there's a lot of ginger Jesuses portrayed in art, and that Ashkenazi Jews have there's a lot of ginger, you know, as Jesus apparently is portrayed, and Muhammad, Muhammad apparently this is it's something to dye your beard red if you're a Muslim in order to be like Muhammad, we wondered if you had any idea why that should come about.
Why would red or ginger be seen as some kind of divine connection. That I think in the paintings, it's interesting because I don't actually think Jesus was ginger, because the painters, I think, were doing something different. But it just astounds me that no one's really researched it. So I found a book. I spoke to some art historians, and they just thought I was mad. But they also were helpful and gave me some books. But the books talked more about Jesus' haircut than the hair color. So it's long hair, he's like merciful and whatever. If he's got a crew cut, it means he's in the 20th century. But it doesn't actually talk about the color of the main character at the center of this painting. So that is significant. And I think partly that is because, personally, my view is it's drawing your eye to that person, because the red or the orange draws your eye to them, so it sets them apart. I think sometimes it functions as a halo. It's that golden glow around them. And it is just gold as depicting divinity. And I think because it's so rare and unusual, that throughout the world it's been seen as this kind of otherworldly thing. And in Russia, people thought they were told they were witches because they had it. So I think it is seen as some supernatural, which doesn't contradict the genes aspect, but it's the way cultures have seen that. So yeah, is that helpful?
Oh yes, so no
Got
one's
ginger baby.
researched it. Yep.
Fantastic, there you go. Isn't that
Well,
it?
you get to the point if you were,
Ginger bell button.
if you wanted to take any more pictures in Scotland, yeah, with little Alice. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a question online. Brian Green asked, Kieran, have you ever been to the Ginger Festival in Holland?
No, I haven't actually. Thank you, Brian Online. But the Little Book of Gingers, which have just printed, which is in all good bookshops, in the National Galleries, it was actually printed in Breda, where the Ginger Festival used to be hosted. So that was the link. I've been to the Redhead UK in London, where I did the shoot, but I've never actually been. Maybe I will.
Yeah.
I see. Mm-hmm. Have you been to it, Brian?
Mm-hmm.
So there are various.
Wait, I think somebody's. Hold on, sorry. I think.
Wait for the microphone.
Sorry.
Hi, hello there. So I'm from Inverness.
Fantastic.
My hair, though, is actually inherited from my Irish mother. My father was a very typical Invernessian murray blonde. And I do find that I can probably identify those two types just by sight. So if I see somebody with sandy colouring, I think they're Irish heritage. And then my father, Viking-like. So real, and it's Albert is almost actually connected with the genetics. I think there's something about Murray, Aberdeenshire males, if they have a certain type of head. If their head is slightly too large for their body, that probably indicates that they're from Viking heritage, and it's something you can just see. And usually, if I'm guessing it is correct, but sorry, that's just an observation. My question,
That's a great
sorry.
observation. The large-headed people of Murray. I'm very careful. That's the next set of pictures.
Well, yeah. So I do have two questions, if you don't mind. One for each of the speakers. So Kieran, just following on from this lady mentioning the kind of religiosity aspect of it, and you were mentioning the halo. So when you're actually, technically, when you're taking photos, you mentioned the background being the same with your beloved Pete Brown background that you take. Lighting aspects, was it the same for each of your subjects? Did you deliberately choose to use almost the same technical specification for lighting and refraction, however that works? So that's a question for Kieran. And then for Albert, when we're talking about the kind of the ginger diaspora and the genetics that come through, and you were mentioning Spain and then also Jamaica, there's been probably the two, if we can take examples. You were mentioning they're probably centred around about the 18th century in terms of invasion or the slave trade, triangular trade when it comes to the West Indies. 18th century through to, well, the 20th, 21st century, that's only just a couple of hundred years. Is that something that is quite special in itself, in terms of perhaps you would say the speed of the ginger genetics going through somebody's genetics in a space of 200 years to enable to produce somebody like Jamaica who has mixed race coloration, but their hair happens to be ginger, or in Spain where we tend to think it might be darker haired, darker complexioned folk, But then with the ingress of the British, as you say, in the 18th century, that turned the coloration just in the space of a couple of hundred years. Is that really the sort of speed and that works? So sorry, those are my questions.
I was going to say the Jamaica link was
Thank
actually
you.
from Professor Rees at Edinburgh Uni. I'd spoken to him and read one of his papers on melanoma in Jamaica. That's why I first thought of Jamaica to go there, actually. So it's actually, that was the inspiration for it. But I think it was before the 18th century as well. Like the Scottish Darien colony was the end of the 16th, wasn't it? And so like that failed in Panama, and they would go up there. And even before that, the conquistadors. So I think there's quite a few centuries. But
yeah, the Celtic invasion of the north of Spain was before the 18th century. And this gene can be hidden in the population for a long time, because if you have the black copy and the red copy, you basically have brown hair or quite dark hair, and it doesn't have any kind of negative adverse effect related to sun, for instance. So this could be maintained in the population for a very long time. It's only people that have red hair that, if they are on that very sun exposed environment, they might have they might develop diseases that is bad for them.
Hi, sorry, I've got a really sore throat, so I'll try and crackle through this. Obviously, you've met a lot of gingers during your project. Obviously, there's a genetic trait of the hair colour. Did you see any other genetic tendencies? You know, we do get the prevalence of being, you know, quite a fiery character, etc. So did you pick up on other traits, regardless of your location, be it, you know, Scotland or going into Russia, or, you know, that other genetic connection other than just hair colour at all?
Yeah, I think the fiery one is interesting, because I think if people keep assuming you to be fiery, you do get a bit angry. You know, it's just like, don't you? It's just like, oh, you're fiery. It's just like... but the thing that seemed to be consistent in terms of character traits was the ones that came anyway tend to be quite friendly, or like trying to be jokey. But I think partly to try and get on in life and not be kicked in the shins. So maybe that was a similarity. But I mean, there was so much variety, and that's partly, I'm trying to show that it's a homogenous group apparently, but there's so much diversity in that. And it's not just we're all fiery or we're all X, Y, or Z. There is this kind of so many different people, quiet characters, loud characters. So I think there probably is traits that are similar throughout. I think physiologically, I was hearing about like anaesthetists have to give more pain relief to, or more anaesthetic to ginger people because they're more sensitive and to pain, and maybe that's to pleasure as well. So I mean that must have impacts as well in character, but I'd say that's shaped by not the genes, but because of the way people react to them. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, there's a question over at the back there, and then there's a gentleman down the front, and then we've got one more online, and I think that might be it because it feels extremely lively. So lady at the back there.
I have a question for Albert.
Yeah.
So you talked about the UK Biobank.
Yeah.
Well, last year I broke my wrist and got sent for a DEXA scan. You also talked about vitamin D production. So I'm just wondering, is there any link between red hair, vitamin D production, and protection against osteoporosis?
Not that I know of, but probably yes. So if you produce less vitamin D, then you're more likely to have osteoporosis. And depending on your skin color, if you live in Scotland, you might have more or less risk of developing osteoporosis because of that. And can I say something about the other? So on that study, we also found that many of the genes that seem to be affecting hair color also affect the structure of the hair. So the structure of the hair seems to be thinner than black hair, and it seems to be affecting the shaft of the hair, so the tiny hole through which the hair grows. So yeah, it could affect other traits as well.
First of all, just as an aside, my father worked in what was then Northwest India, now Pakistan, and I inherited his red hair as he inherited it from his father. And you notice I used the word red, so I'll better go back to ginger. And he was called Babri Saab, which I believe translates as fiery sir. You know, so I don't know if that was temperament or hair colour.
Yeah.
But my question is, going back, we're in an art gallery and we're talking about older pictures. Yeah. I mentioned in passing to one of my sons, also with the ginger hair, that I was coming to this, and he said, do you know, Dad, that in early graphic novels, comics, quite often the main character was given red hair to stand out. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if the reason why a lot of models that were used in paintings got red hair was because the availability of tinctures, prints, colours that are available. And once again, as an aside, he was saying as more colours become available, the red's dying out in comics and the gingers, and they tend to be replaced by, and it's slightly very sensitive area, people with sort of from minority ethnic groups, so is that seen as more representative, but it's the gingers that was picked on.
So you're saying because the availability of colour that they... Yeah, I wonder, because I thought that with the paintings. I thought, have they just chosen these for the Scottish National Gallery? That's why there's loads of gingers. But I have been around the world, and there's loads of them. And I thought maybe there's just a fire sale on pigments. I genuinely thought that. But I mean, these pictures, like, I've not got it there actually, at the front. It's like blue, the lapis lazuli blue. You've got the pinks. They've got every colour under the sun. But they're specifically using that colour. Like there's so many colours in that Botticelli. You can all go and look at it afterwards. And her hair is more strawberry blonde, which is what polite people like to say. But they have the colours there. So I think it's not like in these paintings, someone will do a PhD on some snail in the top right corner that represents death and mortality, and they don't bother to think about they've chosen the hair colour at the centre, you know. So I do think it was an intentional thing, and maybe it's interesting about comics. I hadn't heard that, and I'd love to. No, I think it probably does stack up. But I think as well, it's a conscious thing of. It represents this kind of, if there's a superhero, you know, it's red and fiery and powerful. So I think it is and it draws the eye to the thing. That's a really interesting. I want to say something about India, but we're out of time.
No, just on that point, I wish we had a colleague here from our conservation team, because my sense is that red as a pigment is very transient, both in textiles and also in paints, industrialised paint production. But it's also reminded me that we used to do a tour of the National Galleries of Scotland around the redheads in the collection. So I kind of feel like maybe this is something to revive at some point.
We've reintroduced that to the Portrait Gallery. You can do a Smartify tour of the Portrait Gallery, looking at our best ginger portraits, if you'd like to do that. Yeah.
I need to do that. Sounds good.
So we are over time, but I am going to ask one more question from the online, because hopefully it will be a quick answer. Somebody called A Little Idea has asked, will you be bringing the project to other areas of the UK? So I think it's a question about, will there be an opportunity to see the photography elsewhere?
Yes. If you got a gallery, A Little Idea, and you've got some funding, get in touch. No, I'd love to do it loads of places. I want to go overseas for the next bit, but it's just always a bit time and resource. I've got more ambition than funding, so yeah, I want to. It's a story. Last thought, it's a story that carries me along. It's like I'm not in control of it. I go where it wills.
Brilliant. Well, listen, folks, thank you so much. Please put your hands together and thank Louise, Kieran, and Albert.